morning, everybody. I can't believe you're all here at 8:10 on a Saturday morning. Thank you so much. Yeah, like I just said, I'm talking about what I'm calling mapping bridges and bonds. What I'm really concerned with is trying to expand some ideas I have about social capital theory, which I think has some really important ties with especially frontier journalism, but journalism in a lot of dimensions. But in trying to figure out how I wanted to explore social capital theory in relation to frontier journalism, I came into all sorts of questions about the relationship between newspapers and other types of information infrastructure, other ways that information was carried. And as it got more and more complicated, I found myself more and more needing to see what I had in text across a whole bunch of different sources. And what I wound up kind of coming to, oh no, this got unplugged, is that maybe we need to include mapping, or what is a method called spatial analysis, an awful lot more in our research, especially now that we have some tools that make that more possible. So I'm going to share how I'm trying to do that in my own research right now. Okay, the big idea here is that if any of this sounds interesting to you, I need you to come and talk to me, okay? Some of this, like, seriously, I don't think people have done what I'm doing here before. So if this sounds cool to you, let's work together. If you know somebody who you think might be interested in this, come and talk to me. Because a lot of times, this type of data analysis benefits from a large team, okay? At least 3 people. So if I could get a team together, we could address some of your questions, some of my questions. Cool beans, okay? So spatial analysis. What does spatial analysis really mean? On one hand, it means maps, right? That's what I was really interested in doing here. But we can complicate or sophisticate that a little bit. This is per Luke Anselin, who's at the University of Chicago. He says that he helps define spatial analysis as where things happen, right? So that's sort of getting us spatial. Why they happen there, and then most importantly, how does the interaction with environmental and contextual factors affect what happened, right? So instead of looking at newspapers in isolation, and specifically newspapers in one community in isolation, what happens when we broaden that context and start looking at newspapers in relation to other types of information infrastructure and other newspapers, right? I think we get a richer picture of how the industry evolves, how it evolves in certain markets, and in my case, I'm really interested in geography, how it evolves in a specific context such as the state of Colorado. Now this is being done, right? We actually, Big H History has something that they call spatial history. There's an entire project at Stanford University, and there's a link if you're interested. You can take a picture right now and go to their website. It's some cool stuff that they're producing. And in fact, this Cameron Blevins, who went through that project, I believe as a graduate student, has produced journalism history research that uses spatial history. He was looking at Houston newspapers and how those newspapers represented space in their columns to sort of lay out spatially the relationships between those ideas. Okay? I can get you these links if I haven't given you enough time. So what are my objectives with my current mapping project? First, I want to explore this tie between social capital and journalism, because I think it's a really important tie that explains a lot of things, especially if we're thinking about things like the booster role of the press in the frontier. Social capital may have a really important role to play there. I'm also very interested in the idea of the newspaper, not that newspapers aren't very important to study on their own, but as a component of a larger information infrastructure that includes things like railroads, that includes telegraph lines, that includes the post, right? It's one of many ways to spread information, especially on the frontier. And then I'm also really interested in spurring innovation in our scholarship, trying to find ways to present this information, do research in new and innovative ways. So what am I specifically doing? Right now I'm in the data collection phase. I'm looking just at the state of Colorado from the point of the gold rush in 1859 until the end of the century, 1899. I was just going to go through statehood in 1876, but I think some of the richer data is going to come later in the era. So I have a directory that was compiled earlier, I think it was in the 60s or 70s, by someone who went back and did a fantastic job of finding every newspaper that had been recorded in the state of Colorado. It's pretty detailed. And so using that and other resources, I'm pulling the location of every newspaper that was logged, right, that had a lasting record, the name of the paper, the dates that it was active, the frequency that it was published. I can get all of that in that resource. I'm getting circulation data from Ayers and Rowells where I can, and then I'm using this when I can to extrapolate based on population data, the circulation per town or county, information like that. And then I'm putting that on a map using ArcGIS, which is a sort of a mapping program, along with railroad data. I'm actually drawing out railroads, the development of the railroads in Colorado year by year based on somebody else's work, right? Post offices, this is a post office in the ghost town of St. Elmo, Colorado. Actually putting out where every post office was in the state of Colorado during this period. Telegraph offices in Colorado. This is proving to be a bit more difficult to find, but the Western Union did publish directories occasionally, so there is at least some data available. And then trails. Early in this era, we didn't have trains. We didn't even have like roads. We had trails, and so I want to see where those go because those were the most efficient means of communicating information in that era, right? And as consequently, also Pony Express, other express routes through the area. What this requires is that I also look up, I have to find information about all of these locations that no longer exist, which are hundreds, and so I'm trying to find information about these ghost towns. Now, I have early products, right? I'm a long way away from being done with this. But this is a GIF that shows I have got a rough draft of all of the data about the newspapers and their locations into this mapping program. And so here, the time is up here. This is 1876, moving forward year by year. This shows the spread of newspapers throughout the state of Colorado, which I already think is fairly interesting stuff, right? We don't think of newspapers this way when we all look at the directories that we're familiar with. It's entirely different when we see these points put on a map, because now we see them spreading in new and important ways. Now I want to show this other map to you because I think this one's particularly important. This one starts later. This shows the development of newspapers along with railroads in the state of Colorado, starting in the 1860s. This is particularly important because once we get later here, in the late 1870s, we see newspapers all out here, but we don't see as many along these railroads, which if you know anything about the theories about boosterism and the relationship between the press and railroads, we would expect to see a lot more newspapers along those railroads. So I think that this is already, it's promising at least. So I'm about out of time. These are the products that I expect to get out of this, a rich data set that other people can use, a public history resource, which is something that oral history gets at. We can do more of that for the public. And then a couple of papers. You can read more about that online. And then I'll wrap up by just, here's a link. I don't have physical copies of my paper, but you can take a photo of this and it will go straight to my paper, which is on my website. I would just tell you to go to kenjward.com, which you usually can, but my domain expired. And so I'm, it snuck away on me, and so I'm just in the process of getting that back up. But this link will get you right where you need to go. Okay, I'm out of time, so thank you very much. I look forward to any questions you have later.